All right. Well, we're ready to get started. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Matthew Monagle, and I'm the CRM Web Manager here at Columbia Business School Executive Education. We're going to be having about 15 to 20 minutes of lecture today, as well as some time at the very end for Q&A. So just one note about how to ask questions. We'd encourage you at any point throughout today's presentation to ask a question. And it doesn't matter if it's something that just comes to mind or something you want to address at the end. Professor Bontempo will make sure that he circles around and addresses that at the very end of the webinar. So just a few common questions. A recording will be available after the webinar. We usually have those up in about 3 to 5 business days. Again, if you do have any questions, use the Q&A box to go ahead and ask them. And if you are on social media, we'll be following along with everyone else on Twitter using the hashtag CBSExecEd. So it's my great privilege today to introduce Professor Bontempo. Bob is a professor of management at Columbia Business School and teaches both in our MBA programs as well as in executive education. He's an expert in managerial negotiations and has been consulting for over 25 years. He currently serves as advisor to a senior group at the United Nations as well as the Federal Reserve, and he also consults for various early stage investors and startups. But before we actually even get started with his talk, we've got just a short video presentation we want to do, which kind of gives you an overview of what he'll be addressing today, persuasion versus negotiation.
It's not obvious, but I've come to believe that negotiation and persuasion are opposite psychological processes. Negotiation is the mutual exchange of resources for a mutual benefit. Persuasion is the skill of changing what somebody believes about the value of a resource or an outcome, and therefore they require a different set of behaviors. Negotiation is fast, persuasion is very slow. Negotiation is expensive, persuasion is free. Negotiation can be explicit. You can say to somebody, hey, look, we have to work this out. What do you need from me to get what you want? Persuasion has to be subtle. Nobody likes you to walk into a meeting and say, hi, I'm here to change what you believe about X, Y, and Z. So they're extremely different. They're complementary, but they're both based on specific teachable behaviors.
So that's a little bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. And for some more specific information, we're going to actually jump right into Professor Bontempo's presentation. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Matthew, and welcome to everybody who's checking in. I'm very pleased that people have made time to listen. I'm going to briefly say hello to anybody who's a former student of mine, and I'm very flattered that folks have made the time on this busy day. I'm going to try in this brief time we have, maybe 15, 20 minutes, to give some practical and specific advice so that you get a return on the investment you're making and get some very practical benefit out of our discussion today. First, I'd like to start with a very simple point, though, about ethics, and specifically that I'm going to be talking about ways to influence other folks, how to change their behavior, how to change their minds. And we have to address the fact that there are always ethical concerns when we deal with these issues. I'd like to start with a simple point that these skills are tools. And at the Columbia Business School, we give our participants and our students practical tools to help them in their daily work. Tools are not good things and tools are not bad things. A hammer can be used to build a hospital. A hammer can be used to smash a window and rob a store. A hammer is not a good thing and a hammer is not a bad thing. So I don't have any qualms about helping folks get better at these skills. And it's partly because I see leadership as a manipulative act. I think leaders have to get comfortable with the fact that part of their job is to manipulate people to do things. As a parent, I'm trying to manipulate my kids to not take drugs and to study and get good grades. As a leader of an organization, we're trying to manipulate people to maybe learn new skills or collaborate across functional lines or acquire new habits. So I don't have any problem with the ethics of becoming more effective at influencing other people. And now let's turn to something that I hope is useful. I'm often surprised when I'm working with folks and they're sharing their leadership challenges with me, that they don't seem to have a clear sense of this very simple question of, what am I trying to do? And what I mean by that is, we often go into very high stakes meetings or important conversations without a real clear sense of what we're trying to achieve. And I find people would be immediately more effective if they would simply start, maybe in the elevator ride on the way up to the meeting, or maybe in the cab on the way over to the office, just simply asking themselves, what am I trying to achieve in this meeting? And if you start thinking about it, you can realize that many of the meetings we have are actually negotiations. Many of the interactions we have with other folks, we don't think of as negotiations, because when I use the term negotiation, people often think of a transaction, M&A, or some sort of formal political or business negotiation. But the fact is, if you're trying to build consensus for an idea, get people to buy in on a team, those are typically negotiations. I have an objective, I have a set of resources, I'm willing to exchange them to get other folks to buy into my idea. On the other hand, many of our meetings are actually about persuasion. I'm trying to change how people view the riskiness or the relative reward or value of an outcome. I'm trying to change what they believe or how they perceive the consequences of something. That's a very different thing than a negotiation. And what I'd like to try to cover in just a few minutes today is that negotiation and persuasion, as we mentioned in the video, are distinctly different psychological processes, and therefore, as managers of other people, we need to consider having a repertoire of different skills for these different choices. So if you think about negotiation, it's very expensive. You have to make concessions, you have to give people things, you have to make sacrifices, hopefully in return for getting benefits that outweigh those costs. Persuasion doesn't cost anything, it's just words, it's just language. They both are hard work and they both take preparation. But negotiation requires making concessions or giving things up. Persuasion is really just language. Negotiation is also explicit. You can walk into a meeting and say, look, you and I have a different point of view on this issue. I recognize that we might have different underlying interests or preferences. Let's work together to see if we can come to an outcome of mutual benefit. It's perfectly appropriate to discuss negotiation as a positive, collaborative way to resolve a problem. Persuasion, on the other hand, has to be subtle. Nobody likes it when you walk in and say, hi, your existing political views are wrong and I'm here to change your mind about who to vote for, or how you've been looking at this strategic initiative we're thinking about, or this managerial challenge is short-sighted or ill-informed and I'm here to change your view. It's just not effective, and it makes actually people more resistant. In addition, negotiation is very fast. You can do it in a meeting. You can negotiate something complex in an hour. Especially if you're well prepared, negotiation is a very efficient way to resolve conflicts and build consensus. But be realistic. Think about the last time you changed your mind about an important issue. Persuasion is very slow. Most of the people listening in on the call today can probably think about a specific example where they've dramatically changed their opinion on maybe something that mattered to them. Whether smoking should be banned in public places, or whether homosexuals should have the right to be married, or maybe who you are willing to vote for in our current political situation. My guess is a lot of folks have changed their minds, but it's rarely a sudden cataclysmic event. It's usually a slow process. It's a very different thing. Now, because I want to give people some practical and useful information, I'd like to pick one issue, which is time, and show how the use of time differs when we're negotiating versus persuading. There's a couple of observations I've made in my work at the United Nations or various investment banks around the world. I've advised the State Department, who uses time very carefully. And there's an observation I've made, which is for most folks, 90% of the actual concessions in a negotiation are made in the last 10% of the time spent negotiating. Now, this is not a trivial observation, like you always find your keys in the last place you're looking for them. This is actually a pretty important point. You've got to realize that sooner or later, this negotiation is going to end. And it's only going to end when one of the two parties runs up against a real time deadline. Therefore, one of your first priorities is to figure out what that is. It follows that there's another sort of related issue here, which is one of the two people at the table almost always has a different time deadline. Sometimes it's imposed by the industry they're in. For example, American business is largely driven by Wall Street's quarterly earnings estimates. Sometimes it's an organizational level issue, like car dealers have month-end or quarter-end quotas that they're trying to fix. Or maybe you have a performance appraisal metric that you need to work up against. The point is, somebody's got a deadline. And if it's you, you're automatically in a weaker position because you're under greater time pressure. And the longer this thing drags out, the more desperate you become to wrap it up, and the more willing you are to make concessions. If it's the other person, you're going to notice that by simply slowing things down, building the relationship, you're going to increase in power because they're running up against their deadline. Now, let's consider, instead of negotiations, how does time affect the persuasion process? The first point I want to make is that when I work with people who are trying to change attitudes, for example, marketing professionals, or at the State Department, we're trying to influence perceptions around the world, there's a mistaken belief that the brilliant ideas that led me to my current opinion are going to work on other folks. And we sometimes mistakenly look back at our own evolution of our opinions and mistakenly believe that they came in a flash of insight or in some critical, dramatic change, when in fact, most smart adults with well-informed opinions change them, but only gradually and slowly over time. These flashes of insight are fascinating and quite memorable, but they're actually quite rare. And so I'm asking folks to think about the fact that in the real world, that smart adult across the table from you, maybe your boss or a key stakeholder, has an existing point of view. And realistically, in this conversation, the most you can hope for is to gradually move them along a continuum. First, creating doubt or open-mindedness in their perception, and then creating a desire for more information, and then gently moving them along a continuum. It's quite different from the process of negotiation. Now, another specific piece of advice I can give folks is that really much of what we teach in our various courses is how to prepare. I think most people are overly confident in their ability to just wing it or walk into a meeting and use their skill. If the meeting has real consequences, if it's important enough to have the meeting, it's important enough to prepare for the meeting. If you've decided that it's going to be a negotiation and not a persuasion, there are a couple of specific things you can do to make sure you have the best odds working in your favor. The first thing that skilled negotiators do is do their homework. You need to be able to say, what are the issues that are going to come up in this conversation? A simple way to say this is, for most of the folks listening in on the call, at your level of your career, the idea that you would have a meeting without a written agenda, which is distributed ahead of time, doesn't strike me as very professional. For most of the folks on the call today, if you're going to have a meeting, circulate an agenda, define and control the agenda. That allows you to do the first stage in preparing for the negotiation, which is to anticipate what are the issues that are going to come up in this discussion. What's the feasible range over which we might discuss these issues? And then finally, you really have to know your own preferences because you're going to have to make some hard trade-offs. When you go to buy a car, of course, the first issue is going to be price, and that's maybe the top priority, but another issue might be the delivery date. And you need to be able to explain to yourself, am I willing to bump up the price a little bit if I can speed up the delivery date? Or would I be willing to take a lower price if I can wait an extended period of time to get the car? Knowing your own preferences and where you can make trade-offs is absolutely essential. Because as we like to say, the car dealership is a very expensive place to be sorting through what you really want. Another set of issues which folks have probably heard about before is that there's this very important idea called BATNA. And the BATNA is an acronym which means the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And the reason this is so important is because it's really the difference between the best United Nations diplomats and unsophisticated negotiators. The best United Nations diplomats do not answer the phone. They do not allow somebody to come into their office until they can say, what's the worst case scenario? What's my best alternative to dealing with this person? If it all goes wrong, what am I going to do? And I know that seems defeatist, But unsophisticated negotiators tend to focus on the best case scenario. They fantasize about everything working out smoothly, and they're very optimistic. Sophisticated negotiators prepare by anticipating the worst case scenario. What if the person's emotionally unstable or extremely aggressive or views the world very differently than I do? What am I going to do? And by preparing and understanding what your BATNA is, you protect yourself from emotion, you protect yourself from intimidation, and all sorts of other tactics that people can use on you. On the other hand, if you've decided that the conversation you're about to have is a persuasion, you need to prepare very differently. When I help people prepare for important persuasions, we prepare a script for that conversation. We think about what are some statements that the target of my persuasion is ready to hear? What are things they would accept or agree with? And more importantly, what are some things that the target of my persuasion is not ready to hear? What are some things that they would disagree with or reject or would cause them emotional distress? The research on this is pretty clear that most people that have an existing point of view and a deeply entrenched belief aren't likely to have an epiphany. They're not likely to have a shocking realization. What we've got to do is be realistic and gradually move them along a continuum to get them where we want to be. But whereas with negotiation, we could realistically use an hour, reach agreement, shake hands at the end of it. Persuasion is unlikely to be successful in an hour. And again, be realistic about your own life. When was the last time you changed your mind in a short conversation? Now, that's 20 minutes. And to summarize, I hope I've given you some useful information. Negotiation and persuasion are different things. You need to prepare very differently. You need to think about how time affects them. And you need to do your homework. And now I see that we've got quite a few questions coming in, and I thank you for those. A very common question has been asked by somebody, which I appreciate, regarding salary. And when you go in to get a bump in your salary, you want to think about it as, am I trying to negotiate with this person or am I trying to persuade? It's a choice. Now, let's describe it. If you're negotiating a salary raise, what you're going to try to do is say to your boss or the decision maker, what do I have to do to get the salary that I want? What performance objectives do I have to achieve? What can I give you in terms of commitment or quality standards or new skills learned? And in return, if I do those things, you'll give me the raise that I want. That's a negotiation. On the other hand, if it's a persuasion, you've got to ask yourself, what do I need to do or say to get that key decision maker to think that it's their idea that I need to have a big raise? Do they need to believe that they might lose me, for example, to another organization? But the difference is persuasion requires that we get them to think it's their idea. Negotiation is an explicit discussion of what do I need to give you to get the outcome that I want. Now, there's several more really good questions. Some of them are rather sophisticated and difficult to answer very briefly. But somebody has asked me about the power of storytelling and personal narrative. And here, you're asking a great question, but the answer is more detailed than I can get into in this brief webinar. In the persuasion course, we actually train people in a psychological profile. And we train them to understand that there are different types of people. And different types of people are differentially influenced by different kinds of information. So yes, there are some types of people that find storytelling very compelling. There are certain kinds of problems for which storytelling, vivid, dramatic imagery is the right approach. But there are other kinds of people who find that to be for lightweights, or you actually lose credibility because you're seen as a, quote, storyteller. And those kinds of people need data, facts, evidence, bullet points. They're turned off by storytelling. And yes, there are types of people that like narratives. A personal story or a meaningful relationship is extremely persuasive for them, but not everybody. Some people find that flaky or inappropriate. So there are a variety of persuasive tactics. The most advanced skill is recognizing what type of person psychologically am I dealing with and what type of information can I use to be differentially effective. Now, there are other questions about how to deal with multiple parties. And again, there are tools that we can use. You can look them up on the internet, actually, on stakeholder analysis and stakeholder mapping. And there's no question that many of the folks listening in are dealing in very complex environments where they're not just negotiating with one person, but perhaps multiple functions across an organization. And it's a very useful skill to do a few minutes of homework and figure out who are the key decision makers, who are the influencers, who are the gatekeepers, who are the champions. And we can go through a stakeholder map, identify who the key players are, and to come up with a negotiation and persuasion strategy for each of the different groups. There's a couple of things to read, and while I really appreciate all these questions that are coming in, and I'm going to try to answer a few more, the place to get started is obviously with reading. There's an excellent book called Getting to Yes. It's by Roger Fisher. It's a classic. It's timeless. And if you haven't read Getting to Yes, it's really the place to start. Roger Fisher outlines several practical key behavioral steps you can take to become better. When it comes to persuasion, it's a little more diffuse, but I would say the place to start is an excellent article in the Harvard Business Review called Change the Way You Persuade. And in their article, Change the Way You Persuade, Williams and Miller outline that there are different types of leaders who have different styles, and they are both effective at using and susceptible to different kinds of persuasive information. So our time is just about up. I want to say thank you to everybody who has checked in, and I hope to see some of you in either the negotiation program or the persuasion program that we offer here at the business school. And I thank you for your time today.
One more question that I have for you. We had a few participants who really appreciated what you had to say about BATNA and asked in the questions if you wouldn't mind just restating that and kind of recapitulating what that means. I think they want to make sure they write it down and can refer back to it a little later.
Well, thanks, Matthew. The BATNA is an acronym that stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. The reason that word is important is because a lot of folks have the idea in their heads. The idea is my backup plan, or the point at which I'd walk away, or plan B. Economists call it the reservation price. If you've ever sold anything on eBay, you know there's a reservation price for goods. But the BATNA is a very important idea because it's the thing you're going to do if this negotiation doesn't work out. It's actually the worst case scenario. For example, if you go in to negotiate a raise and you don't get one, it's the job you would take if you get fired. Now, it sounds like it's an unpleasant thing to do, but in my training, I've found a lot of people find negotiations very stressful. It can be a very emotional thing, especially if the stakes are high. And for that reason, preparing ahead of time and identifying specifically what's my BATNA and what am I going to do if this doesn't work out is a very effective way to manage your own emotional stress. Now, that's about the level of detail we can go into on this call, but I hope what folks are hearing is that we have a variety of very practical tools. We can help people with stakeholder analysis. We can help people with developing scripts for important conversations. We can help people identify their BATNA and develop their BATNA as part of the training that we do in our executive programs. So again, I thank you for all these great questions. I hope I have kept my promise that I gave you some stimulating ideas and some practical advice. And I look forward to seeing everybody on campus someday.
Bob, thanks so much for that great presentation today. I know we had a lot of questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, and we're hoping that we'll be able to answer some of them either in the programs if you attend, or if we can answer some of them either by email as a follow-up to the program. We might be able to curate a few of those as well. So just one last question that I saw in a lot of different places about the webinar recording. We will absolutely make sure that you have a copy of that. We have a webinar archive on our website that will include both this and any other webinar that we've done over the last few years. So if you signed up for the webinar attendance, you'll actually get a link to that webinar emailed directly to you. So you don't need to worry about it. Again, I just want to say thank you to Bob and thank you to all of you. This is actually one of our most highly attended webinars, so obviously the subject matter was of interest.